How's everyone today? A lot of you here.
This looks like more than usual. I don't know if it's because we're maybe in a smaller space. Something's different. It looks different.
Everybody's got cabin fever. You're all here.
Everybody has cabin fever and everybody came. Very good. That will work. Well, we try to have the same number every month, but we are glad to see you all come back and return for hopefully the whole year of 2019. We do have the new cooking class calendars, and hopefully you pick one up to see what our plans are for the rest of the year. So take one of those with you and still continue to register for the cooking class online. And we still also have that waiting list that if you, for some reason, can't attend, that really helps for you to call Tamara and let her know. Then that allows someone on that waiting list to make sure that they can get in, even if it's at the last minute. So if you can't attend for some reason, please try to let us know so we can give that spot to someone on our waiting list. We'd appreciate it. We took your suggestions that you gave back in like October, November, somewhere in there, when you fill those out, and hopefully incorporated some of those in that new calendar. So you may see some things that look a little familiar that you suggested or that we tweaked a little bit and added to our calendar to do the calendar for this next year. So, January sounded like a really good month to do soup. So we did scoop on soup. I don't know if I can say that very many times. I think I'll continue to get that kind of messed up. Some of the things we're going to do are some of the, kind of a more nutritious take on some traditional soups, and also, a popular soup with nutritious additions, and then, trying to make things a better choice for us by adding some different things to it. So, since we're a little late getting started, I'm just going to go ahead and let Lynetta start out with our first recipe, the butternut squash soup.
Who's had butternut squash soup before? Anybody? Oh, a couple hands. All right, yay. Well, I hope you like this take on butternut squash soup. I'll be honest, when preparing butternut squash soup, I get a little bit anxious because it's that cutting that butternut squash. It's kind of tricky, and so I'm really excited that Chef's here tonight. He's going to teach us how to cut this butternut squash. But one of the reasons why I love this soup, once I get over, preparing it, is that it's so nutrient dense. And so butternut squash has a lot of vitamin A in it, like you see in carrots. It's also got a lot of fiber, and so it's a really great soup to pair with other sides of a meal. If you look at the calories for this butternut squash soup, you'll note it doesn't have a lot. And so this isn't a food that's going to sustain you for an entire meal. I would encourage you to use it as a side to go with roast chicken or maybe some other protein-rich dish. It's not something that I would recommend going on its own because I don't think it's going to leave you feeling very satisfied, but it can certainly complement a meal and give you a good punch of nutrition. One thing that I would amend to this recipe, you can certainly use 5 cups of water, but if you have vegetable broth or if you have a low-sodium chicken broth, that can also add a lot of flavor to the dish. And so you don't have to just use water, but that is a great option as well. So who's excited to learn how to cut a butternut squash and not cut their fingers? Yeah! Here you go, Jerry.
All right. I'm glad that she said that. Cutting a butternut squash and not cutting your fingers. Probably the biggest thing you have to remember is making sure that your cutlery is sharp. It's very, very important. Most people who cut themselves with a knife in their kitchen is because they're fussing with a knife that is not properly sharpened. So just be mindful of that. Make sure your knives are sharp. When they're sharp, they go where they're supposed to go, right? When they're dull, they have a tendency to try to roll off your cutting board or maneuver around in different places where they shouldn't be. So move that down just a little bit. There we go. Seems to not like being near me. So now there's several different ways that you can prepare a butternut squash for cooking. With a recipe like this, being really, really simplistic is the best way to go. Okay, I believe on the directions it talks to you to using a steamer basket, getting your water good and hot and dropping it into the water and basically boiling it until it's done. if you keep in mind that the smaller things are, the quicker they're going to cook, right? The problem that I had with this is it softened the skin so much that it was difficult to take the meat out without digging into the skin. Because you would think, as hard as a butternut squash is, that outer piece, that skin on the outside, will stay hard forever, right? And it'll never, be biodegradable. It'll be there with plastic and all the other junk that we throw in landfills. But that's not true. It does break down, and it will get soft. And I apologize if you find a piece of it in your soup. Okay? I do my best, and sometimes my best isn't good enough. So just be mindful of that. If you're not wanting to fuss with it like that, sometimes it's easier just to get it soft enough that you can scrape it out, and then cooking it off the rest of the way. That can help. You can also bake it in the oven. Baking it in the oven kind of leaves that shell on the outside a little bit harder. In that baking process, it kind of gets stiff, and that makes it a lot easier to pull that meat out of the outside shell. So let's get into this sucker. I'm really weird about when I cut things. I always want to cut things in straight lines. Like as you can see, the head of this is kind of turned, right? So I want to try to get this as straight as possible so that when I do go to cut it in half, I have a solid base for it to set on. Okay? You want to make it easier on yourself so that you don't have the opportunity to cut yourself. So whatever you have to do to make that happen is what you need to do. So I have a good sharp knife. It also has a hollow ground on it. I don't know if you can see that on the... Yeah, there you go. Basically, that really helps keep whatever you're cutting. It helps push it away from the blade so it doesn't stick to the blade. Like if you're chopping cucumbers or something, and they stay on the blade and they fall up, and yeah, it's a mess. They end up on the floor, right? Okay. I believe in there it tells you just to cut it directly in half. Cutting the stalk, the top part of it, where the seed pod is not, I find that a lot easier to manage and to work with. Because if you're laying this thing on the side and trying to cut it in half, you're going to be fighting a battle that will only end in your finger disappearing, right? So the best way to do it, safety-wise, is to cut that upper piece off and then go ahead and cut that part in half. You can lay it down. I find it difficult to lay it down because they're usually not straight, okay? And it's a little bit difficult to cut that in half. And you can cut it this way, but you just got to be very cautious as you cut so that you can keep it straight. Sometimes it'll want to curve out. So you just have to make sure that your hand is straight up and down as you go to put pressure on that to bring that down. Okay? And then of course the bottom piece we just cut directly down. And when cutting that top off, you can see we're almost right where we want to be, right? Right above the seed pod. Usually go just a little bit above where it starts to bowl out. If you kind of make an imaginary line where that starts at and just go a hair above it, you'll usually be right where you need to be. Okay. Then you'll scrape out all the seed pods, get that taken care of. If you're going to put this in the oven and bake it, I recommend coating it in a little bit of pan spray or olive oil. I'd really recommend olive oil just because that oil kind of gets in there and helps crisp that skin up. It'll also help keep this from sticking to the bottom of your pan. Do the same on the bottom halves. If you're looking for cutting it into pieces, right? Let's say you want to make a butternut squash soup, but you want to use a couple of the butternut squash to puree, right? But you also want to have some chunks and pieces, make it a little heartier. If you've got a strong enough vegetable peeler, you can peel the skin off of a butternut squash, okay? Like I said, you've got to make sure that you've got a good, strong vegetable peeler, right? I don't think I would use the metal ones. Do you know what I'm talking about? The old traditional metal ones that almost look like a bass guitar, right? Yeah, you don't want to use those. They'll bend really easy, right? So nice one that's sturdy, got something nice on it, and you can just go down and peel outer skin right off. As you're going down it, you're going to be able to see where you can see how orange this is. Then you can almost, I don't know if you guys can see it on that camera, but there's just a thin white line going along the edge of that. That's basically the separation of the meat and the outer skin, right? So as you go down, you'll be able to see, I can take a couple swipes at this, and generally I'm in a position where I've got the meat visible. I can go through, I can skin all of that. Skinning this part can be a little bit difficult. What I recommend doing, if you're going to do that, I recommend leaving it whole, okay? And skinning it out that way. Maybe cut the top off steel, and then just go through and get everything peeled off. And it's not that bad if you've got a good, strong vegetable peeler. That really does make a huge difference. It can handle it. I recommend the kind like this that are, you've got a nice plastic, sturdy plastic base. You don't want something that's really bendable, okay? And it'll work great. Other cooking methods for it, I just recommend you can saute it. You can cut that up and cube it if you want to put it in your soup. Saute it with a little bit of olive oil, some salt and pepper. Just keep it moving in there. It's starchy, of course, and so it can have a tendency to stick. So just like any other starches, you just want to make sure that you keep it moving in there, and it doesn't have the opportunity to stick to the bottom of your pan and then burn, and then make your soup taste like burnt squash, which is not good. Nobody wants that. Yes?
Did you use the water or the broth?
I just used the water, like the recipe called for. Yes, I found it to be, maybe it was missing something, right? But I wanted to make sure on this one to follow that recipe, because every time I've made it in the past, always use chicken broth and everything else that's in there, just like it says, and it turns out great. But I wanted to give the recipe a try, so you guys could try it just like it is. And if it's maybe not something that you like so much, then when you go home and try it, you can add, like she said, you can add that vegetable base, or you can add that chicken broth instead of the water, to get that flavor profile that you were really looking for. All right? Any other questions?
So is this one that you would try? What did you think? Okay. Have you done a butternut squash soup before? This one different? Same? Okay. I'm kind of getting some maybes out here, I think.
It's not, it wasn't as thick as.
Okay. It was a thinner consistency. Okay. Well, let's go on then. The next one we're going to kind of look at is the baked potato soup. Okay. How many do traditional baked potato soup or potato soup? Almost everybody in some way. So this one is a little bit lighter because it uses 1% milk. It uses the light sour cream. So it's reduced in calories, and we snuck something else in to reduce that calories, that cauliflower. Okay? So that reduces the calories. It also helps reduce to some degree the carbohydrate content of it, and also gives us as well as potatoes, gives us a vitamin C source, which is good. So it's really what I think would be a really good definition of a healthy balance. It's got our potatoes that are starchy, that have more carbohydrates, and then it's got our cauliflower that is less starchy, a few less calories in that. So one of the things it suggests on there is cooking those potatoes in the microwave. Have y'all done that in the past when you've done potato soup? That was a new trick for me. I hadn't done that before, but it seemed to work really well, much faster, and much easier peeling, especially if you let them cool a little bit. So how do we do that for the recipe that we're going to try, Jared? Do you know? How we did the potatoes for this recipe?
I cheated. I did. I cut the potatoes and cut them into cubes, and then put them in our steamer. So I did not microwave them. We do at times, like if we get a patient call down that needs a baked potato and we don't have any cooks, We go through that process, you poke a few holes in it so it doesn't blow up on you. And then get it in the microwave, bring it up to temp. It's very effective in a pinch. The one thing I would say is to make sure that the potato is on something, a plate or something like that, because it does have a tendency to burn at the base of whatever it's touching. So that can be helpful. Move it around as you go through. Every couple minutes, move the potato so the bottom of it doesn't get hard. Sometimes it'll do that, depending on your microwave.
So I think doing the potatoes in the microwave is a really quick and easy way. The other thing, it says in the recipe that you can bake them if you would choose to do that. So if you're baking potatoes for something else, maybe you throw in 2 extra, and then you utilize those for potato soup, 2 days from now or the next day. So you could actually make this to be a really quick preparation. And since you're going to actually blend those potatoes all up, we're not real concerned about how pretty they look whenever we bake potatoes. So I did it last night, put them in the microwave, they were ready to go, and then I did have a challenge in cutting that cauliflower head, Jared. So what would be your suggestions for cutting that cauliflower head?
Honestly, we didn't have a cauliflower head available. It was just late when we realized that we should have had one for you guys to demo. But anyway, when doing that, get as much of the stuff at the bottom of the base of the stalk where the flowers start to come out. Get all that stuff out. There's usually some leaves, almost looks like cabbage leaves. They're really thin. Get all those cut up and out of the way so that you can expose nothing but the stalks of the heads of the broccoli is a lot easier to do because you've got a lot longer part of the stem before you get to the top of the trees, where cauliflower is much more condensed. But if you get that cleaned up, you can slowly start to tell where that stem goes into the head, almost like a mushroom, right? Whenever you've got a mushroom and you pull that stem off, you can really tell where it's up in there and where it connects at, and you can go in and remove that out and just leave that head of the cauliflower. And then you can basically I would suggest just cut it in half, right down the middle, and then slowly begin to cut away, and that way you're left with nothing but the florets. But really, for this recipe, I wouldn't recommend using the larger portion of the actual stalk, right? Or if you went to the tree trunk, don't use that. That's a little bit fibrous sometimes. But the rest of that, I would say just right where if you're looking at it as a whole, right where the florets are kind of at, and that stem, if they're even, if you just draw a line, cut that right there, and you can use absolutely every bit of it in your soup, because it's soft, just like the florets are. Like I said, further down the stalk, it begins to get a little bit more stiff, a little bit more fibrous, a little bit harder to utilize in this type of recipe. But it was saying to trim out to where you just have those florets left. I don't see any reason why you can't use a little bit more of that stalk in there, as long as it's not super fibrous, which will tear up your blender and immersion blenders and things like that. And just use absolutely every bit of it.
It does make it a little bit harder if those, because I got some that were a little tough last night when I was trying it. So how many of you do have an immersion blender that you use at home now? So I have a new one now. I tried it last night when I did it. And so what I found as a trick to me is make sure your pot's deep enough, because it does splatter around. So if you haven't tried one, or you decide you want to do one, make sure that you have whatever you're putting it in, a deep enough pot so that you can kind of splatter around in it. So I tried it last night. What are some other suggestions? I thought if we didn't have an immersion blender, we really do need to blend this up, the potatoes and the cauliflower, because it needs to be a thicker, smoother soup. So another thought I had was you would maybe could take it and then put it in a food processor to maybe blend it, because it does need to, you don't want it, I don't know, it didn't seem like it would be a very good soup lumpy to me. So I think we do need to blend it in some way.
Absolutely. We do a potato soup in our cafe. It's a thick soup, but we don't thicken it with the potatoes. We don't blend the potatoes. We leave the potatoes cubed whenever we make it. And a lot of times we use leftover baked potatoes for that process. But the one thing I would say would be difficult for using a food processor with a soup is it's going to be hard to keep it from coming out. Food processors are usually not used for liquids very much. They can kind of be a bit of a pain with liquids because they're high power, so you got to go low. If you're in a pinch, obviously a blender would work really good. But these immersion blenders, they're usually pretty inexpensive, and they're very simplistic piece of machinery. I always kind of think of it that way. How simplistic is the workings of this piece of this equipment? And basically thinking that for $10, you may be able to get one for $10, but if it's complex, there's a lot of things that can go wrong, right? If it's a pretty simple process for that machinery to work, more likelihood that it's going to last a little bit longer, even if it is, fairly inexpensive. But they're a great investment for your kitchen. You can just grab it, do everything in one pot. You don't have to worry about cleaning your blender afterwards. Usually these heads detached. This is actually a commercial one that we have in our kitchen that we use
This is
at
what the
times.
household one looks like.
Yeah, nothing wrong with
So
that.
less than $20 at Walmart
Yep.
is what it was. I think it worked well. You'll notice that this recipe, I think the calories are about 200, the fat's only 7 grams, and the sodium is around 300, a little over 300. So you really notice that the recipe, actually you pick up the sodium probably for the most part because we use that low sodium chicken broth, will be with that cheese that you put on the top, and then with the crumbled bacon. So if you were really looking at trying to reduce your sodium intake, you might leave those off. But I do think that makes it look lots nicer and does add that taste. So there's that little bit of cheese. You could use turkey bacon, which I tried last night, or you could use regular bacon. There's just not a big, huge difference in the sodium, a little bit more difference usually in the fat using regular bacon compared to the turkey bacon. So if you use it sparingly to just top your soup, then I think you're okay with, even though if you maybe on a reduced sodium diet. So, did you taste the cauliflower? Good. That was part of the point, was that you didn't really know the cauliflower, except that you did know that the cauliflower was in there. So, is this a maybe? A yes?
When people think about potato soup, generally you don't think of a liquid soup, you think of a creamy soup, right? And that's why I think it's a good idea in this place to blend all that, the cauliflower and the potatoes in, because you're omitting things like roux, which is just butter and flour, right? So you omit that added fat. It makes it to where, you know what, I don't feel like I shouldn't be putting this cheddar cheese and bacon on top of it because I saved myself a little bit of fat and calories and sodium by actually blending the cauliflower in and helping tighten the soup up so that it could be the way it's supposed to be. And so you can do little things like that when you cook that can help you down the road with being able to add those things that are just traditional things that you put on your potato soup and other soups as that.
All right, I'm really excited about this next recipe that we're going to try, African peanut soup. We chose this recipe because it was suggested by someone from cooking class. And so someone from cooking class said, I'd like to see African cuisine. And I saw this recipe as we were preparing the menu for tonight, and I thought, well, let's just go ahead and do it. So has anyone ever tried a recipe like this before? Oh, I'm so excited. There's only like 2 hands in the audience, and one of them's my husband. So I know, I know that's because we sampled it. To make sure that it was good and it would meet our standard. And so there's several things that I love about this soup. And so one is that it introduced some new ingredients in my own kitchen. And so tonight in one of our gift bags we have some of these odd ingredients. And so how many of you keep ginger in your kitchen? Couple people, all right, so ginger, it's a root. If you've ever grown irises, it kind of looks like the rhizome of an iris or those roots, and so it's a wonderful seasoning used in a lot of different foods, not often foods that we grow or we eat here in the Midwest. And so it was something that kind of challenged my palate. I grew up on a beef farm, and so I grew up eating very standard potato and meat diet. And so including ginger is a fun way to get a great antioxidant benefit. And so oftentimes you hear about that. How it helps with nausea. But anyway, great ingredient to try. Another one was that coriander. And so, yeah. All right. And so that's something that maybe if you win our gift bag tonight, you'll have these ingredients. A couple other things I want to add as the soup's coming out to try. We have sweet potatoes in this dish. And so sweet potatoes, like this butternut squash, are rich in vitamin A. And so vitamin A is that vitamin that we need for eye health, for skin health. It's a very potent source. And so a lot of our red and orange vegetables contain that vitamin A. And so a great way to get some fiber as well. You don't find that in just regular potatoes, but you find that in sweet potatoes, that fiber. And so got some sweet potatoes with vitamin A, potassium, and then quinoa. Has anyone cooked with quinoa? All right, so quinoa is a seed. Again, it's in one of our gift bags over here. And it cooks rather easily in less than 15 minutes. It comes from a flowering plant that you find in South America. We're seeing it a lot more. I found it in Walmart. And so you're seeing a lot more in stores. And that seed, it's really helpful to rinse it as you're preparing it. It has kind of a powdery residue on it. And they do rinse it before they package it, but it's not a bad idea to rinse it again. That powdery residue kind of has a bitter taste, and it can also cause it to be more clumpy. And so if you want it to be fluffier, that's one of the ways that you can do that. You can also roast that quinoa before cooking it. And roasting it in a skillet will bring out the nutty flavor. Now, have you all seen the different colors of quinoa in this store? There's white, and red, and black. The colors have more to do with the texture than they do like the flavor of it. At least that's what I found. The white you'll find is fluffier, and then the black and the red are not quite as fluffy, and so they're more crunchy. And that would be my preference for this dish. I think it's kind of nice to have a crunch, and so I chose red quinoa for this dish. One nice thing about quinoa is that it is one of the few plant-based foods that has all of the 9 essential amino acids. And so amino acids are our building block for protein, so the stuff we need to stay strong, right? To help fight disease, it's part of our immune system, and not just skeletal muscle. Protein does a lot for us. So those 9 essential amino acids are usually found in animal-based foods, like beef, that beef farm I talked about a little bit ago, poultry and fish, but not often found in plant-based foods. And so that quinoa is one of the oddballs that it actually has all 9 essential amino acids. Peanut butter is our other protein source in this recipe, and it does add some creaminess and some healthy fat. The fat that you find in peanut butter is the same kind of fat that you find in olive oil, so it's really good for you. But it is one of those plant-based foods. It doesn't have all 9 essential amino acids. It's missing one. It's missing methionine. So when you do choose plant proteins like peanut butter, it's good to pair them together. So has anyone tried this soup yet? Yeah, it's actually really good. I was really encouraged. I'm kind of a cautious eater myself, but it was really good. I was excited to try it, so I'm glad that you liked it. Any tips?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, absolutely. Ginger is probably one of my favorite things to work with in the kitchen fresh. Now, most people usually have like ground ginger in their cabinets dry, which is good, right? It's probably one of the spices that I feel is so drastically different fresh to dry. I really do feel like it's a huge difference. It's got such a strong citrus smell to it when it's in the fresh form. Can I just pass this around, if you care?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, we'll just pass it around. You guys can see just how aromatic the citrus is in it. So utilizing it in dishes like stir fries, you see that a lot in different tropic dishes and things like that, they use a lot of ground ginger. I would say that if you find a recipe that calls for fresh ginger root, I would try to utilize fresh ginger root. Now, in the past, I've taken the root and I've peeled it. I've gotten all the outside area part of it off, almost like peeling a potato, really. Wrapping that in saran wrap, really good and tight, putting it in a Ziploc bag and freezing it, and it did absolutely fine, pulling it out and utilizing it in dishes later on. So I feel like that could be something that you guys could buy, a small bit of it. You can get it at Woods and Walmart, anywhere here in town, I'm pretty sure. Aldi's usually has it on hand as well. And utilizing that in a lot of your different dishes. Play around with it. It really can go with a lot of different things. As far as the other spices go, does anybody know where coriander comes from? Cilantro, exactly. Coriander is basically the seeds ground of cilantro. But it does have a slightly different flavor profile. A lot of people, when they eat cilantro, they say it tastes like what? Dish soap. Yeah, perfect, exactly. Most people that eat it and don't like it says this tastes like soap. Which my question is why you been eating soap? Right? And it's like, well, because I grew up in the Midwest when I was young. There you go, right? Everybody knows what I'm talking about. So, Mom washed my mouth out with soap. That's exactly right. And with coriander, it's not quite as strong as a flavor. But now, if you smell it, you can be like, okay, I kind of see where they're very, very similar in a way. But they really do have a lot different of a flavor profile. So a lot of people will use that coriander in dishes to get that same type of flavor in there without having it being so vibrant like fresh cilantro is. But yeah, it's great to use dry ingredients. There's nothing wrong with that. I will say that anytime you have a recipe that calls for dry, and I think this one actually put it on the recipe. Nope, it's another one. Another one did. And we actually had to substitute wild rice for the quinoa. We thought we had quinoa. It came out to be embryo rice for making like risotto. It was kind of behind something, and they thought it was there, but it wasn't. So, unfortunately, we had to make a substitution on the fly, which I said, you know what, that's great, because that's a lot of what this class is about, is finding different substitutions to utilize things that you have in your house instead of going out and buying things. And really, that rice, that wild rice, is a great substitution into the recipe. I think as far as texture, it's a little bit different, obviously, because quinoa is a little bit smaller. Don't be ever scared to cook quinoa. Very, very simple to cook. Boil your water, throw the quinoa in, let it set in there, and come back to a boil, and then shut it off, put a lid on it, and leave it there. That quinoa will absorb all of the water in the pot, and you'll be good to go. So it's very, very simple to cook, very easy to use, and also it's a great thing to add into dishes, just to add it in there, right? You could do it with the potato soup. You could add it in there. I mean, think of the vitamins and minerals and antioxidants that this is adding into your soup. And it really doesn't affect the flavor that much, especially if you're using it in like a potato soup where it's going to be ground down anyway. So, what did you guys think of the soup?
Good.
It was good. Awesome. Any questions? All right, Rhonda's going to move on.
So is this one you would try? And when I first looked at that title on this recipe, I'm thinking, okay, it's going to have peanuts in it. But it doesn't, so it does have the peanut butter. So I think this would, to me, it tasted like a very substantial, fill you up lots kind of soup. So I think, it's not great on protein, but it's not bad either. It's about 9 grams per cup. You could always have a second cup of it if you wanted. So we're going to go on to our last soup in the chicken tortellini soup. How many have done that? something similar, or you like it, you know, that's one I like to eat out and somebody else has to work on it. So this one, hopefully you can do some things to make it a little bit easier for you. It's kind of lightened up as well, you know, but it's still, you know, really comforting, really tastes good, I think really could enjoy. So, you know, you start out by sauteing the onion and the peppers and the carrots. And if you didn't want to cook your chicken breast, as this one says, you could maybe, you know, get a rotisserie chicken and use a chicken in that way. Or if you had some chicken left over, maybe you could add that to this soup as well. So we, you know, backed off that cream a little bit, maybe from what your traditional creamy chicken tortellini soup is. And so you want to, you know, if you want to make this one, it really does make a pretty big pot of soup. So you might want to reduce it to some degree if you only wanted 1 or 2 servings, or you didn't want to eat it for 5 days, something like that. Because it's really probably not going to freeze very well if you put the tortellini in it. So if you did want to freeze it, I would probably, you know, try to freeze some without the tortellini in it. So it's really a good balance. That protein also has that carbohydrate that we do need some. We kind of want our brains to function, so we got to feed it a little bit of carbohydrate. And then it's low in the saturated fat, although we did use a little bit of heavy cream in it. So I think this one, you know, will be one that will also stay with you and will sustain you and will be a good, you know, evening, cold evening, like what, Saturday night when it's going to be wind chill very low. You might want to have it for Saturday night. If this is a little bit different in some ways than you've used in the past. So Jared, any suggestions on our noodles in that?
I find it, you know, and it really depends on the product that you buy. Most tortellinis that you buy in the store are going to be frozen, and they're mostly cooked, right? So you just bring them in, throw them in, and finish them off, which is very simple. The way I usually do it with soups like this, because boiling noodles in a soup or letting them be at a low simmer, you really can get into a lot of trouble with doing that. If you get it too hot, it'll boil and it'll just shred those noodles. They get too hot, they'll come apart. You know, when those starches begin to heat up, they begin to just pull in moisture everywhere. And usually that makes them softer, which makes them a lot more delicate. They get beat up when you're trying to stir it. They can settle to the bottom and stick. So I would suggest getting everything ready to go, adding your chicken, and adding your noodles very last. Okay? Maybe pull those out, let those tortellinis begin to thaw a little bit, like I said, if you're buying them from the store, which I believe is the way the recipe calls it to be done. You can make them yourself, right? So you may make homemade tortellinis at home.
If you don't do it at home, probably
I don't do it at home.
So you can do the dried or the fresh or the frozen. So the frozen might be a really good quick choice for this.
Yes. And they're made to be frozen, and that's the kind of thing I like to tell people, that if things are made to be frozen, then they need to be frozen. If they're made to be at room temperature, then they need to stay at room temperature. If they're made to be cool, then they need to stay cool. You know, and that's how we kind of judge everything. People are like, well, why don't we keep our tomatoes in the dry goods? And it's like, well, because our tomatoes come cool. They come in the cooler, so we need to keep them cold, because if you've ever seen a tomato that's been cold and then you bring it out and set it out at room temperature, it's going to be soft and gone in no time flat. So, but yeah, just using those tortellinis in a soup like this is a great idea. But like I said, I would just add those in very last, turn that temperature down on low and just let it simmer. And basically all you're doing is you're allowing the soup to get back up to a temperature after adding in ingredients that are either cold or room temperature, right? Unless those ingredients are hot and you add them to the liquid part of your soup, it's going to cool that soup down, right? And so you want them to be done, but you don't want them to get done too fast, right? And that goes with any type of soup with noodles in them. It's always a good idea to add those in and have that be your end process. Try to get that temperature on your soup to a point where you don't have to do much with it, okay? You don't want to have to be stirring it a lot to keep it from burning and sticking to the bottom, because you're just beating those noodles to tar after that, and that doesn't make for a very appealing soup, right?
So what did we sneak in this one that made it a little bit more nutritious? The spinach, maybe? Do you usually put spinach in your baby spinach leaves or frozen spinach in your chicken tortellini soup? Probably not a lot of times. So that's another way of sneaking in something that we'll get a little bit of additional vitamin A from. And I kind of thought this would be a good idea that, you know, when I have my spinach leaves and I don't get them all eaten and they start kind of getting kind of wilty, this would be a good way to use a few of those instead of just throwing them in the trash.
I think we talked about that when we did our class on using the scraps from our vegetables and things like that. Great.
I really like to use everything out of my refrigerator and not have to throw it away. So I think that's just a good move.
Yeah.
So is this one that you will try?
Yes.
Will you change your recipe? Yes, no? I see a couple of no's, but I see some yeses. Yeah.
Spinach will grow all winter long in the garden. But I pick it sometimes and I freeze it. Because when I go to make soup or something frozen, I just take it out to the house.
Yeah. Good. Good.
It freezes well.
Yeah. She said that spinach will grow in your garden all year round. So she goes in and picks it and then puts it in the freezer. And then adding it to her soup, she just pulls it out and crumbles it. And it's already broken into pieces. Has anybody ever tried to chop spinach leaves? Like you get it in a bag in the store, right? Those of you that just buy it from the store. It's pain, right? It's like trying to.
And he likes doing stuff like that.
Trying to wrangle chickens, you know. It doesn't work. So it can be frustrating. So yeah, that's a great idea. Getting those frozen and then just crumble them up. That looks wonderful. I'm gonna try that next time. I don't have to wrangle chickens.
Turnip greens work the same way.
Do the same thing with
Oh, good.
turnip greens.
Yeah.
Freeze them and then crumble them.
Great.
I think we forgot to introduce ourselves, but I think most all of you know that Jared is from our nutritional services. My name's Rhonda. I'm one of the dietitians, and Lynetta is our other dietitian. We are missing Lindsay, our other dietitian tonight. You may have noticed, and she had to go tonight for childbirth classes, so we won't be seeing her this month or next month. So she will be learning how to bring that new little baby into the world. So we hope to have her back in March for our cooking class in March. So don't forget the cooking class for next month is hearty casseroles. Now, why did we decide on hearty casseroles for February?
Heart month.
It's heart month. Yeah. So it will be hearty casseroles on February the 11th. Same kind of thing. It's the second Monday. Register online.